Okay, I'm on a few Facebook pages that have recently been talking about 5-color mana base and 5-color commanders and tribal commanders, and I figured I'd go ahead and just put my 2 cents into the ring. I like 3, 4, and 5-color commanders. My first commander ever was Horde of Notions, but I didn't play him traditionally as an elemental tribal commander. It was more just good stuff because 5/5 for 5 mana with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, with the ability to recast elementals from your graveyard, seemed pretty good, but I didn't play him as that. But he is amazing, access to all the colors, and I'm just going to give you a quick run over of my particular deck build and why I play each individual card. So here we go. We're going to start at CMC 1. First off, we have Flamekin Harbinger, 1/1, elemental. Every creature in this deck is an elemental. He comes into play, search your library for an elemental, reveal it, shuffle your library, put that card on top of it. Good turn 1 play, good recurrence, and just really sets you up. Really good with cards like, where is it? Risen Reef, really good with Risen Reef. Just really good at setting you up later game. Faithless Looting. So in a deck like Horde of Notions, where you're going to be recurring spells from your graveyard, recasting elementals, Faithless Looting pulls double duty, letting you get 2 new cards, dig deeper into your deck, and discard things that you can possibly recast later with the Horde. So, really good way to go. Flashback makes it that much better. Soul Ring. There's nothing I need to say here, it's Soul Ring. Here we have Careful Study. It's a Faithless Looting without flashback in blue. It's really amazing. It's so old it really doesn't see any play anywhere, but I found it in a box. I'm like, yeah, I want to double up on the looting effects because it's just so powerful with the Horde. Swords to Plowshares. Here we are, we're just gonna exile creatures and take the scariest thing out of the game, give whoever controls it a little bit of life, because when the deck gets going, it just hits like a brick house. So giving them a little bit of life isn't really that big of a deal in the long term. Exploration, letting us play an additional land on each of our turns. We're playing a 5-color mana base. Getting to all of our colors, ramping out hard is really important, and Exploration is just the best legal card in Commander for that, letting you play an additional land on each of your turns. For 1 green, Smoke Raider. This guy is amazing. 1 in a red, tap him to add 2 mana in any combination of colors to your pool, but you can only spend the mana to play elementals or activate elementals. He's a 1/1, so he dies to pretty much everything, but if he sticks that on turn 2, that's a turn 3 Horde of Notions. He generates so much value. He is absolutely absurd. This is our first 2-drop there. Moving on. Thunderkin Awakener. This guy was from M20, has quite a bit of text. Thank you, the Chandra core set, for giving us some really decent elementals. 1 in a red with haste for a 1/2. Whenever he attacks, you get to choose an elemental in your graveyard with toughness less than his. return that card to the battlefield tapped and attacking, you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This isn't bad. There are a lot of elementals that you want to recur. Flicker Wisp, Risen Reef, Lightning Skelemental. They just have a lot of powerful value that you can just get him right on back with this guy and just keep repeating it. He's really strong, very strong, especially with haste. Comes down and you just get to use that right away. Here we have a Shoo-In from Ikoria, Skycat Sovereign. White and blue for an Elemental Cat 1/1. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with flying. And 2, a white and a blue, and you can make a 1/1 Catbird creature token with flying. So he makes tokens that are not elementals. But to be fair, I'm playing Avenger of Zendikar. It doesn't make elementals either. And it's a flyer. So this fills the hole where my biggest weakness is absolutely flyers. So being able to just keep dumping my mana into his activated ability to give myself cover in the air is really valuable. I haven't gotten to use him a whole lot yet, but I know he's going to be invaluable. Settled Mariner, white and blue, for a Shapeshifter Changeling. Every creature type, so technically he is an elemental. He's a 2/2, and whenever I or a permanent I control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. So this is just a little bit of added protection for my elementals from single target removal, protects me from discard spells, has nearly protected me from Aetherflux Reservoir in the past. He can be quite useful, and he's recurable because he's a changeling. Next we have Creeping Trailblazer. Red-green, other elementals you control get +1/+0, pay 4, so 2, a red and a green. He gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each elemental you control. And he's a 2/2, so he buffs my entire team, and he himself has the ability to become massive late game. Moving on, we have, and that's going to bug me if I don't fix it. There we go. Next we have Voice of Resurgence. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn or when he dies, put a green-white elemental token onto the battlefield that has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. So he's recurable, and he's just going to keep making tokens. He's a really good 2-drop against control decks. Very, very powerful. Can start to really overwhelm them unless they have a board wipe, and even then, when you can just keep recurring him to make tokens, it's amazing. Finale of Devastation. I do not play Craterhoof Behemoth in this deck, so this is my alternative to Craterhoof Behemoth. X green sorcery. Search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X/+X and gain haste until end of turn. This deck is very capable of producing tons and tons and tons of mana to dump into Finale of Devastation, making it just absolutely devastating. Go figure. Life from the Loam, 1 and a green sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and it has Dredge 3. So this is a very valuable card in several applications. First, it lets us return 3 target lands from our graveyard to our hand. This is important because we're playing a 5-color mana base. I've got 10 fetches, and being able to get those back to keep ramping is really important. Make sure I have all of my colors. The next aspect is Dredge 3. We want to put cards into our graveyard. That's how we get them back with Horde of Notions. So it's pulling double duty. Just a really, really good card. Assassin's Trophy. Black-green for an instant. Destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller may search the library for basic land, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. This deck is really heavy on its spot removal, and I say heavy, and I really don't mean it. It doesn't have a ton of spot removal. Well, more than so than board wipes, I imagine, just from doing a quick glance over here. But this gets rid of pesky lands, this gets rid of planeswalkers, this gets rid of anything and absolutely everything that I need it to get rid of. I don't care about recurring it. It's just good at a one-shot spell. Red and 6. Return red and green for a legendary planeswalker, Ren. Look at that art. Look at it. It's crazy. Is he melded? He's melded with the tree. +1. This comes down with 3 loyalty, +1. Return up to 1 target land from your graveyard to your hand. -1. Red and 6 deals 1 damage to any target. -7. You get an emblem with instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard have retrace. What we're primarily using Red and 6 for is the +1, to get lands from our graveyard back to our hand. Just like Life from the Loam, the ability to replay fetch lands is extremely powerful, so that we have all of our colors. His -1 is semi-relevant. It can kill Bop, it can kill Llanowar Elves, it kills a few dorks. It's not bad, but I'm primarily using it for its +1. Its -7 ability I have never gotten to, which gives us an emblem with instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard have retrace. I love retrace. I think it's a great mechanic, but I have never once gotten Ren in 6 up to 7 loyalty to get that emblem. Terminate. Black and a red for an instant. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated, and it's such a beautiful card. It doesn't need the text. It's terminate. Just wow. Stunning. Rampant Growth. 1 and a green, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. Pretty standard. Nothing really to say here, just really need fixing. We'll go from the top. Nature's Lore is the exact same, although it grabs any forest, puts it into play. It doesn't enter play tapped, so this can be relevant, but it's in the same boat as Rampant Growth, just grabbing colors that we need. Doubling Cube. This card is an all-star for the deck. 2 colorless. It's an artifact. Pay 3, tap it. Double the amount of each type of mana in your mana pool. I have had many games where I've had to take out my phone and pull out a pool tracker so I can keep track of how much mana is in my pool and how many colors. It's absolutely nuts. There are a few other cards that pair really well with this, that you will see as we go along, but this card is just gross. It is so very, very powerful. Arcane Signet, probably one of the best cards printed in the last few years for Commander. 2 of any color, tap it, add 1 mana of any color in your Commander's color identity to your pool. Really important, really relevant. We're playing a 5-color deck, so just fixing. We need fixing. Eladamri's Call, green and a white for an instant. Search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So creature tutor, our deck is primarily elemental creatures, so being able to tutor up what we need when we need it is really, really important. Moving on to the 3 drops. I'm going to start off with Flicker Wisp. 1 and 2 white for a 3/1 flying elemental. When it comes into play, remove another target permanent from the game. Return that card to play under its owner's control at end of turn. So it blinks something, brings it back at the end of the turn. Flicker Wisp is pretty powerful. I haven't played it a ton, but it can be semi-relevant. Blinking tokens, blinking planeswalkers to reset them, blinking lands. It's Flicker Wisp. It's a 3/1 flyer. It's not bad. Probably the best elemental in the deck, Risen Reef. 1, a green and a blue. For a 1/1 elemental, whenever he or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put the card onto the battlefield, put it in your hand. From M20, this card is just absurd. I play Omnath, Locus of Rage, and Panharmonicon in this deck, and I have had many games where I've literally drawn my entire deck and have a massive army of elementals, and it's just gross. If they don't have a fog effect or some way to just save themselves, they just die. They just die. Risen Reef is a busted card, and if I can get it out on turn 2 or turn 3, the game is going to go really, really well for me. Lightning Skelemental. He was a new addition from about a year ago. I like him. 1 black, 2 red to cast. Trample Haste, 6/1. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. And at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice them. I like Lightning Skelemental as a forced discard, kind of a king killer sort of card, and the fact that he's recurable with Horde of Notions, but also recurable with... where was he? He's in the 2-drop slot. Thunderkin Awakener just makes him a really valuable beat stick. Just keep getting him back and getting him back and getting him back. So I like him. You can empty empty someone's hand with him and just keep getting in. It's great. Incandescent Soulstoke. 2 and a red. Other elemental creatures you control get +1/+1. Pay 1 and a red, tap him. You may put an elemental creature card from your hand into play. That creature gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at end of turn. Where Flicker Wisp comes into play, and is actually very powerful, is with the Incandescent Soulstoke. Flicker Wisp hitting the creature, the elemental that you cheat in, keeps it in play permanently. And if you're cheating in something retarded, you're going to have a really, really good, powerful turn. So I love Incandescent Soulstoke. He is my sneak attack for this deck, even though I have sneak attack and I don't play it in this deck. He is quite amazing. Next, Sword of Feast and Famine. I only play a couple swords in this deck, but this one is by far the most powerful. 3 many color. For an artifact equipment, the equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and green. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. That last bit, untapping all your lands, is just nuts. If you have Horde on the battlefield with the sword on him, Horde has trample, so giving him protection from black and green is going to be extremely relevant, and you can pay Horde's activation cost, return an elemental from your graveyard to the battlefield, hit with the Horde, untap all your lands, and cast another elemental from your graveyard. It works extremely well. Sword of Feast and Famine is an amazing card. Anguished Unmaking. Foil Stamp from April 2016. 1, a white and a black. Instant. Exile target non-land permanent. You lose 3 life. I do not like losing life. Vindicate would be much better here. Unfortunately, I do not own a Vindicate. So Anguished Unmaking does get to fill that hole. I do like that it exiles instead of just destroying, but I do not like the fact that it cannot hit lands. But 3 life to permanently get rid of any non-land permanent is a really good trade, in my opinion. Harrow! Great ramp. 2 and a green, instant. As an additional cost to play Harrow, sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them into play. Then shuffle your library. Harrow's great. Yes, you sacrifice a land on cast, but it's instant speed, and the lands you get come into play untapped. So, very useful on your turn 3. Tap out, cast Harrow, sack one of the tap lands, drop 2 lands into play. You've got 2 mana now. That's a Signet, that's a creature, that's a lot of value. Harrow is a really good card. And we're playing a 5-color deck. Fixing is important. Next, Crucible of Worlds. 3 mana for an artifact. You may play land cards from your graveyard. I said fixing was important. We're playing 10 fetch lands. The ability to recur them with cards like Renin 6 and Life from the Loam. The ability to play additional lands with exploration is invaluable. You cannot beat fetch lands from your graveyard. Crib Swap. 2 and a white. For a tribal instant, it's a shapeshifter card. And it's a changeling. This card is every creature type at all times, meaning I can cast this from my graveyard with Horde of Notions. Remove target creature from the game. Its controller puts a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling into play. So it costs more than Swords to Plowshares. But instead of gaining life, they're going to get a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter. Not to mention the fact that I can just keep casting this from the graveyard with Horde of Notions. Really good card. It's instant speed, so even better. I'm not a big fan of sorceries unless they're extremely, extremely powerful, so Crib Swap is a great card. The next sword that I play, Sword of Truth and Justice. 3 mana for an artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +2/+2, has protection from white and from blue. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate. Equip cost of 2, which I failed to mention on Sword of Feast and Famine. This is relevant because the deck has several +1/+1 counter sub-themes. So by being able to deal damage, put a counter onto a creature, and then proliferate all the counters I have on the battlefield, counters that were placed maybe through Avenger of Zendikar or the Great Henge, that is absolutely awesome. Plus, protection from white and blue. Yeah, you're not going to be swordsing or pathing or unsummoning any of my stuff. It's pretty nice. Good old Rhystic Study. Is there anything that needs to be said about Rhystic Study? 2 and a blue. Enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 mana. No, nothing else needs to be said about Rhystic Study. This card is magnificent. Chromatic Lantern. 3 for an artifact. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and tap, add 1 mana of any color. We're playing a 5-color deck, and eventually our fetch lands are going to stop fetching lands. This allows our fetch lands to continue to tap for mana and be whatever color we need them to be. Really good fixing, really important for decks that are so heavy in their colors. 4 drops. Omnath, Locus of the Royal. 1, a green, a blue, and a red for a legendary elemental. He is a 3/3. When Omnath, Locus of the Royal, enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, draw a card. This works well with the Sword of Truth and Justice, with the +1/+1 counter sub-theme. This is great with Exploration and Crucible, and the added benefit of getting our lands back from the graveyard and being able to play multiple lands in a turn. He has an ETB ability, shooting something, anything, for damage equal to the number of elementals we control. This is great with cards like Yurek the Desecrated and Panharmonicon. It can get so crazy we can actually just shoot our opponent from near full life. It's pretty good. I like Yurek. He draws us cards, he puts counters, he shoots stuff for damage. He's great. Flamekin Zealot. 1, 2 red, and a white. Creature, Elemental Berserker. They really need to print more creatures with the Berserker creature type. He's a 2/2. When he comes into play, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste until end of turn. This is really important with Omnath, Locus of Rage. This is really important with just Titania, Protector of Argoth. Anything that's making a bunch of tokens that have summoning sickness comes in, gives them a boost, gives them haste, and being able to keep this trick in the graveyard so that you can cast it later, right after you've amassed a giant board state. Really awesome. Very powerful. Also sees play in Legacy Dredge. Amazing. Tameo, Collector of Tales. 2, a green and a blue for a legendary Planeswalker Tameo. Look at her. So pretty. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to discard cards or sacrifice permanents. That's just a good old static ability. And I think the Planeswalker static abilities from War of the Spark are by far some of the best Planeswalkers ever printed. Ooh, fine print. Choose a non-land card name, then reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all cards with the chosen name from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Return and -3, so the first ability is +1. -3, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. She comes down with 5, so she's pretty hard to kill. Her -3 lets you Eternal Witness something back, and the +1 just dumps a bunch of stuff into your graveyard. The odds that you're going to hit whatever you name are really low, but just being able to put 4 cards in your graveyard, get stuff back, and not be forced to discard or sack permanents is pretty nice. I like Tameo. Panharmonicon. 4 for an artifact. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. We've had quite a few ETB effects. We're going to be looking at a few more here down the road, so Panharmonicon is just a great card to play here and get a ton of value. Moving to 5-drops. Muldrifter. 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer, elemental. When he enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. He has an evoke cost. Pay 2 and 1 blue. So I may cast him for its evoke cost. If I do, he is sacrificed when he enters the battlefield. But he will still draw me the cards. So 3 mana to draw 2, or 5 mana to draw 2 and keep a 2/2 body. But generally, when I'm casting him for 5 mana, I'm casting him with Horde of Notion's ability, because I've already cast him for 3 and sacked him, and then I get to get him back later. Good value. Just keep churning through the deck. Ugh. Dirty Steves. Gigantha, the Wellspring. 4, and then Growl. Legendary creature, Elemental Elk. I am not playing it for its companion. I am playing it because it is a 5/5 that I can tap for mana of all colors. And it can't be spent to pay generic mana costs. But the fact that I can tap him and activate Horde once is... I mean, it's stupid. It's just stupid. So either tap 5 lands or tap 1 Gigantha. I'd rather tap 1 Gigantha to activate Horde than tap 5 lands or 3 lands. Or, yeah, Gigantha is really good. Titania, Protector of Argoth. 3 and 2 green for a 5/3 elemental legend. When she enters the battlefield, I return a land from my graveyard to the battlefield. Ramp. Ramp is good. Whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 5/3 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. We have 10 fetch lands. We're going to be making a lot of 5/3 elementals. Revelark. 4 and a white for a 4/3 flying elemental. When he leaves play, return up to 2 creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to play, and it has an evoke cost of 5 and a white. I have not used Revelark a ton, but the times I have used it, it has been very effective. Board wipes, it dies, and I'm able to get back a couple of small things. It just keeps me on the board, keeps me in the game. Ah, Tragic Arrogance. 3 and 2 white. I love this card. For each player, you choose from among the permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then each player sacrifices all other non-land permanents they control. So it's a board wipe where I get to pick what my opponents get to keep. It doesn't matter what I lose, because in the long run, I get to keep Horde of Notions, and he lets me play everything else from my graveyard. So, for anyone watching in white, you may want to consider picking up Tragic Arrogance. It's not expensive, and it is an absolute bomb. Drop this, they get to keep their signet or their token, and yeah, this card is just great. Cavalier of Night. Would it be an elemental deck if I wasn't playing the Cavalier cycle for Mem 20? No. That's the simple answer, no. 2 and 3 black. For a 4/5 elemental knight with lifelink. When he enters the battlefield, I may sacrifice another creature. When I do, I destroy target creature an opponent controls. So it's a way to put creatures into my graveyard to get back later with Horde of Notions, and it gets rid of those pesky creatures my opponents keep playing. Oh, and when he dies, I get to return a creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from my graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, he puts stuff into the graveyard, he kills their things, and he gets stuff out of the graveyard. And he's got lifelink, which when you're playing 10 fetch lands, you're gonna need some lifelink. Next on the Cavalier cycle, Cavalier of Dawn. 2 and 3 white. For a 4/6 elemental knight with vigilance. When Cavalier of Dawn enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. When it dies, return target artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. So, this ETB is amazing, just at nuking anything that's really pesky and trading it for a 3/3 golem. When she dies, I get to get back either something my opponent has destroyed previously, or something that I may have milled earlier in the game. So getting artifacts and enchantments back, getting back a doubling cube, getting back a Mirari's Wake, these are all really powerful cards, and a 4/6 with vigilance is nothing to laugh at. Cavalier Flame, 2 and 3 red. For a 6/5 elemental knight. Pay 1 and a red. Creatures you control get +1/0 and gain haste. So really good haste enabler. Just fire breathing on all your creatures. When he enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards. So he lets me pitch my hand, refill, and remember, I'm going to be casting those elementals from my graveyard with Horde. When he dies, he deals X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. Generally, I'm getting so many lands back that his final ability really doesn't deal very much damage at all. But it has the ability to, if I were to utilize it and plan it in such a manner. But 6/5 that lets me dump my hand, refill, and give all of my creatures fire breathing and haste. He's pretty strong. We'll continue on with the Cavalier cycle. Sorry, Yarrick. Cavalier of Thorns, 2 and 3 green. July 2019. Such a pretty foil. For a 5/6 with reach, when he enters the battlefield, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest into your graveyard. So ramp, and it fills the graveyard. When he dies, I may exile it. If I do, I put another target card from my graveyard on top of my library. I'm generally not ever exiling him when he dies, because the ability to replay him with Horde of Notions is just too powerful, especially being a 5/6 with a reach. This deck has a big weakness to flyers, so he's too valuable to just get rid of. Cavalier of Gales, most likely my least favorite of the Cavalier cycle, but 2 and 3 blue for a 5/5 elemental knight with flying. When he enters the battlefield, I draw 3 cards, put 2 cards from my hand on top of my library in any order. When he dies, he shuffles back into my library, and then I scry 2. So I cannot recast him with Horde of Notions due to his death trigger, and the Brainstorm effect is useful since I'm playing so many fetch lands, but it's really not super relevant. But I feel if I wasn't playing the cycle, I wouldn't be doing it right. Our last 5-drop creature, aside from our commander. Yarrick the Desecrated. 2, a black, a green, and a blue, for a 3/5 with Death Touch and Lifelink. And if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Wow. 3 instances of trigger in that sentence. Slightly triggering. So he's a better Panharmonicon, and being able to recast him with Horde just to keep getting him back, because he is a big target. Once he comes down, people are going to want to get rid of him. He's got Death Touch and Lifelink, so he blocks really well. He'll gain you back a little bit of life, but you're just going to gain so much value from his double trigger, from all your permanents triggering an additional time. It will be absurd. Nissa, Vital Force. 3 and 2 green for Planeswalker Nissa, 5 loyalty. +1, untap target land you control. Until your next turn, it becomes a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. So she makes an elemental, it's still a land. -3, return target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So we're going to Ewit something. And -6, you get an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. This is great because she starts at 5, ticks up to 6 on the very first turn she comes down, so you can just, if she survives to your next turn, you can just emblem her right away and start drawing cards whenever you play lands, which will just keep your hand absolutely full. Bring to Light. 3, a green and a blue. September 2015. Those were the fun times. I really enjoyed Battle for Zendikar Standard. Converge. Search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast Bring to Light. Exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Bring to Light is a terribly overcosted tutor that casts the card you tutored for, but it's one of the more fair tutors in Commander, I feel, and we are in a deck that is playing mostly creatures with a few removal spells, so this can be whatever you need it to be when you need it to be that thing. I love Bring to Light. It's a great card. I wish it saw more play. Unburial Rites. 4 and a black. For a sorcery, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has flashback for 3 and a white. So this is great because we are already dumping creatures into our graveyard, so this just gives us a little bit of extra way to get them back for a little cheaper. Especially if we have a hard time keeping Horde on the battlefield, Unburial Rites can be really good at just getting something back. Mirari's Wake. 3, a green and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Yeah, this card with Nyx Bloom Ancient and Doubling Cube, which I have had all 3 out on the battlefield at the same time. It was not... It was a nightmare to keep track of all that mana. My turn went really long. It was great. I did really well. But yeah, Mirari's Wake is a great card, especially if you're dropping it on turn 4 or 5, or, you know, let's say you're a monster who has Soul Ring and a Signet on turn 1, and you're playing Mirari's Wake on turn 3. No, just go to town. Mirari's Wake is awesome. Vigor! 3 and 3 green. For a 6/6 elemental incarnation with trample. If damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. When he dies, he's shuffled into the graveyard. When he's put into the graveyard from anywhere, he's shuffled back into the library. Vigor's good. He works with the +1/+1 counter sub-theme of the deck. He keeps your stuff from dying, from combat damage, and you cannot recast him from the graveyard with Horde, but his ability to just put counters on stuff is way too valuable to not play. Muldrotha of the Gravetide. More reanimation. 3, a black, a green, and a blue. Look at that beautiful stamp. It's such a shiny foil. What a nice foil. 6/6. During each one of your turns, you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. So she's going to let you play an additional 2, 3, 4, 5 spells a turn from your graveyard. Green Warden of Marasa. 4 and 2 green for a 5/4 elemental. When he enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So he Ewits. When he dies, you may exile it. If you do, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. When he dies, I'm rarely ever exiling him because of the ability to recast him with Horde of Notions. And he's a 5/4. He's solid. Moving on to the more expensive spells. Nyx Bloom Ancient. This card should probably have never come off of the printer, let alone out of the brain of whoever designed it. 4 and 3 green for a 5/5 with trample. It's an enchantment creature elemental. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. Every time I've had Nyx Bloom Ancient on the field, I have won. Every time. This card is gross. It should never have been printed. But that being said, of course I'm going to play it. It's an elemental. Omnath, Locus of Rage. 3, 2 red, and 2 green. For a legendary elemental, that's a 5/5 with a landfall trigger. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Hey! How many of you remember that we're playing 10 fetch lands? That's gonna be so many tokens. Whenever Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, he shoots something for 3. It's a nice board wipe you got there. It's a shame I've got like 20 elementals on the battlefield. Yeah. Omnath is probably the way I've won the most games with this deck. Omnath, Risen Reef, Panharmonicon, or even Yarok, or both. Good times. Avenger of Zendikar. 5 and 2 green for a 5/5 elemental. When he enters the battlefield, you put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land you control. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. With fetch lands, this is... yeah, it's gross. You're going to be growing those plants really fast. And you just be... yeah, just going to be growing them really fast, summoning those vines up to choke your opponents, tie them into submission. It's going to be absolutely brutal. And the ability to recur him with Horde of Notions, because they'll want to kill your Avenger. Your opponents will definitely want to kill your Avenger. And then you'll cast Horde of Notions and replay Avenger. And then they will be sad because you'll have double the army of plant creature tokens. Also, get a lot of plant creature tokens, or just a lot of dice, because you're gonna need them. Zendikar Resurgent, 5 and 2 green. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So, like Mirari's Wake, this is a great mana doubler. But whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to draw a card. So this fits with Horde of Notion, letting you cast elementals from your graveyard. So it ramps you, it refills your hand. It's really good. I also think it's rather cheap. I could be wrong. Let's find out what this card's going for. Price hunting. Price hunting. $5. Refocus the camera. This is a $5 card. Get it while it's cheap. Maelstrom Wanderer, signed by Mr. Boxa himself. 5, a blue, a red, and a green for a 7/5. Creatures you control have Cascade, or creatures you control have Haste, Cascade, Cascade. So when we cast him, his Cascades are going to trigger. We'll flip cards from the top of our library until we hit a non-land card with a mana cost that is cheaper than 8. We get to cast that, and then we get to do it again. And he gives all our creatures haste, so if we hit creatures, they're coming down hot. Tooth and Nail, 5 green green. Honestly, it really should just be 7 green green. I don't know why anyone would cast it without paying the entwine cost of 2 colorless. Anyway, choose one. Search your library for up to 2 creature cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. Or put 2 creature cards from your hand into play. Its entwine cost of 2 lets you choose to do both. So you pay 9 mana, find 2 cards, tutor up 2 creatures from your library, and then put 2 creatures from your hand into play. 9 mana for maybe 15 or 16 mana's worth of creatures with ETB effects. Yeah, I love Tooth and Nail. And our final card, we have a beautiful foil borderless Great Henge. The cards I had to trade to get this was quite the stack. 7 and double green for a legendary artifact. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it to add 2 green and gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So it gains us life, gives us mana, puts counters on our non-token creatures, and keeps our hand full. Also, it's beautiful. This card was not cheap. So those are all of our spells for our Horde of Notions deck. Now I would like to go over the mana base, because we are playing a 5-color deck, so our mana base is gonna be a little interesting. We got the POW right here, so we're just gonna go ahead and start off. Mana Confluence, tap, pay a life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, so just whatever color we need for the cost of 1 life, all on 1 land. Cavern of Souls. As Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it, add 1 mana of any color to your pool, but you can spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. So uncounterable elementals is really good, especially when it's fixing you for all of your colors, making your creatures, giving your creatures that layer of protection, so they will hit the battlefield. You'll still get the ETB triggers, even if your opponent instantly kills it. Primal Beyond, signed by Mark Tedden. Beautiful foil too. As Primal Beyond comes into play, you may reveal an elemental card from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped. Tap it to add 1 color, or add 1 generic to your pool, or tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to play elemental spells, or activate abilities of elementals. Good fixing. So the first 3 here are 5-color fixing. We're going to go on to basic lands, because I do believe you need to play basic lands in your 5-color deck. We have 2 forests, 2 mountains. Look at that artwork. Absolutely gorgeous. I love old Odyssey foils, old Onslaught foils. Just beautiful. We have a swamp, an island, and a plains. We go heavier on the black and on the red and green, because those are our primary colors for most of our elemental spells. Next, we are getting into fetchland territory. Prismatic Vista tutors up a basic land. Scalding Tarn, Misty Rainforest, Flooded Strand, Bloodstained Mire, Wooded Foothills, Polluted Delta, Verdant Catacombs, Marsh Flats, Windswept Teeth, 10 fetch lands. The deck is very inconsistent without these. Our ability to get these back from the graveyard, to keep playing them and getting the colors we need, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, making sure we can cast Horde of Notions right on time. These are some of the most important pieces of this deck. Moving on. Shocklands, Overgrown Tomb, Blood Crypt, Signed Breeding Pool, Hallowed Fountain, Godless Shrine, Steam Vents, Watery Grave, Temple Garden, Sacred Foundry, Stomping Ground, the Shocklands are quite valuable when they're managed properly. Because you are paying life to fetch, it is not always the right move to pay life to have your Shocklands to come in untapped. I've had games where I've paid 12, 15 life, 18 life in shock and fetch lands alone. Those are games that are very hard to win when you've depleted half of your own life total and you have 2 or 3 people attacking you because you're ramping so hard. So they're valuable, but manage them wisely. Next, we have Grove of the Burn Willows. I play this as a green-red duel that does not hurt me. I do not care if my opponents gain 1 life. A green-red duel that does not hurt me is very beneficial. Shambling Vent. Enters tapped. Taps to add a white or a black, and I can pay 1 a white and a black. It becomes a 2/3 elemental with lifelink until end of turn. That's still a land. We're hitting the creature land portion of this, and there's only a few that I play. Shambling Vent is one of the few. Lifelink is powerful when you have so many fetch in shock lands. Being able to refill your life total is nifty, especially being able to put counters onto Shambling Vent and proliferate them, even if it's returns to being a land, you can still proliferate counters. And yeah, one of my favorites from Battle for Zendikar. Next, Celestial Colonnade, signed by the artist. Enters tapped. Taps to add white or blue to your pool. Pay 3 a blue or white and a blue. Until end of turn, Celestial Colonnade becomes a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature with flying and vigilance. It's still a land. So I can activate this and get a flyer that is vigilant. So I can get in for 4 damage in the air and still tap it for mana later. And flying, this deck has a weakness to flying creatures. So Celestial Colonnade, just a great card. Stirring Wildwood. Enters tapped. Taps to add green or white to your pool. Pay 1 a green and white until end of turn. Stirring Wildwood becomes a 3/4 green and white elemental creature with reach. I play this solely because it has reach. Getting murdered in the air by 5/5 or 6/6 or 8/8 flying dragons is not a way I want to go, and I would rather sacrifice a land than die to big creatures in the air. Hissing Quagmire. Enters tapped. Tap it to add black or green to your pool. 1, a black and a green. It becomes a 2/2 black and green elemental with death touch until end of turn. So this becomes a really useful blocker. And if your opponents aren't paying attention, it can be a very tricky blocker. And especially with cards like Life from the Loam, Renin 6, Crucible of Worlds, you're not concerned about it dying and only getting that one activation out of it because you can replay it and keep gaining that death touchy blocky goodness. Finally, Raging Ravine. Enters tapped. Tap it to add red or green to your mana pool. Pay 2, a red and a green until end of turn. Raging Ravine becomes a 3/3 green elemental creature with, whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's still a land. This plays into the +1/+1 counter sub-theme, and just keep making it big. If they wrath your board and all you have are a bunch of lands out, you can just keep animating the Raging Ravine to keep getting in damage. And that is my Horde of Notions 5-color elemental deck tech. Like I said, Facebook has been aflutter with chatterings of 5-color commanders and 5-color mana bases. So here is my 2 cents. I do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.